What's going on, everybody? It's me, Jason from Buy, Build, Sell, your Los Angeles contractor and developer. And today we are going to be talking about real estate investing. We're going to be talking about the pros, the cons, where to invest in terms of residential, in terms of commercial. We're going to talk about both. We're going to talk about my experience in both worlds and give you hopefully a clearer insight into this world just a little bit better. If you have questions, leave them down below, hit me hard, and hopefully I can either make another video in response to your questions or just type in a little comment letting you know what the answer could be. I've built probably somewhere between 5 to 10 apartment buildings. I think that my preference on the investment side is definitely commercial, just strictly out of volume. There's a lot of benefit to that. You can't have a house with 30 doors, but you can have an apartment with 30 doors. Even an expensive home can get anywhere between $8,000 to $15,000 a month, let's say, on rent. But if you have 30 doors on an apartment building, even at $1,000 a month per unit, that's still 30 grand. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, debt ratios and all that sort of stuff, and that's not what this video is about, but it's definitely something that we can always get into. So it's definitely something I'm curious about, and I would love talking about it. So it's a very easy conversation to roll into. Let's talk about some of the pros about owning residential real estate. Residential homes are usually easier point of entry. They're in the $1 million to $3 million range here in Los Angeles. Everyone needs somewhere to live. The truth is usually you'll find better tenants, longer term tenants, and happier tenants in a home. Most people want a house. They don't necessarily want to live in an apartment building, especially in LA. Another cool thing about homes is you can increase its equity and its value by updating it and then sell it. The other thing too is you can also just have a piece of land. That land could eventually get used for anything else. You can take a 1,000 square foot home and rip it down, put up a 4,000 square foot house, increase the value tremendously from that. You know, when you're dealing with the economy in terms of how things go up and down, you're gonna have more reliability in a home as renters than you will in the apartments. In the apartments, lower security deposits and all that sort of stuff. They're not really too concerned about bailing on their rent. If they want to move somewhere else, they can just go. Maybe they lose a few $100s and that's kind of it. Some of the negatives on residential could genuinely be constant turnover, depending on where you are. In LA, a lot of renters are really people who are probably building other houses for themselves. So they'll catch a home and they'll rent that out for a year or two while they're building their own home. Or they are coming in for a job. So they'll rent a house for a year to try out the job. And once they really tried out the job and they know they want to stay there, they're less likely to continue renting and more want to put their money into equity and buy a home. The other negative is really landlords have less control. They're limited to what they can do. There are some things, but really overall, like, you're not gonna charge your tenants for that much. It's kind of hard to slap a bill on them is the nicest way to put it on a residential, but on a commercial, it's much easier. Most of the time, it's very structured on how those things happen. You've called out a service, you're going to get charged for the service, and you can make back your costs. On a home, it's usually harder to, and there's warranty issues with that as well. AC breaks, you got to fix it, you know? The other thing too is there is less the intensity for quicker turnover. Because there is quicker turnover, there is an intense need to fill those spots immediately. In a commercial building, you may have only a few days really that you need to turn over a unit, whereas on a house, you might need a week or two, which can cost you a lot of time and a lot of money. So let's talk about the pros on commercial properties. There's extended lease terms. So you don't have to necessarily just do a 1-year lease. First of all, you can do multiple month leases. You can do 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. You can do 1 year. You can do 3 years. You can do escalated terms. So you can do a 3-year with a 2% raise or whatever it is, however you want to structure it. And usually, most likely, tenants are likely to stay longer in an apartment. Normally they are looking to hold funds, right? They're not looking to spend. They're paying their rent and then they're going to usually hold their funds and they're not really going to drop it on a big purchase like a house. Overall, the return on investment on a commercial property is usually really small in the beginning, but massive in the end. If you can make it through the first 5 years, you're going to see a massive return of cash flow. And I would say the last thing is that there's more potential for cash flow. There's more potential for earnings. Like I said before, the negative on residential is that you can't necessarily charge for services as much, but in commercial units, it's actually pretty common. So let's talk about the cons for owning commercial real estate. Short list. truthfully, I mean, if you can tell from my tone, I'm definitely a major proponent of commercial owning. I think that it's the backbone of my ability to do a lot that I do. There's a lot that I count on because of it. Definitely a really good thing to have. But there are cons to it. First of all, there is less opportunity. There's multiple blocks of homes in Los Angeles. There's a few blocks every now and again of apartments. There are some areas that are heavily populated with apartments, but overall, at least in the San Fernando Valley where I am, apartments aren't as available. Less product means more money. They are more expensive. They are costly to build. They are costly to buy the land of. When land is zoned for an apartment building, usually the owner of that land is going to price that higher. They're usually already figuring out the counts. They're usually already figuring out the cost for a building. They're already figuring out the ROI on the building. And they're usually assuming that they can sell their property, doing the math for somebody, essentially at a 3% return or 5% return. It's much harder to break into that area. The last negative I would say is that when we have a building that we're trying to increase the value of, it's very difficult to get old tenants to leave. Not that it's not possible, but it is very difficult. I would say genuinely there's no clear winner. I personally do prefer commercial over residential in terms of the investments. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bringing me the most profits or the most cash flow. It just means that personally, as a long-term item, I'd much rather have more commercial units than residential units. But there are pros and cons to both. For long-term investors, if you're really thinking things through, commercial is definitely the way to go. If you're a short-term investor and you really want to think about the short-term gains, residential is probably your best bet. If you have any questions about what I just spoke about, if you have any notes or thoughts you want to share, please leave them down below. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I will see you soon.